Welcome, students. Today, we'll talk about the theoretical aspects of sound in cinema. Now, what do theorists of sound in cinema do when they discuss about film sound? They try to do many things. For example, they try to understand how sound signifies in cinema, how sound conveys certain information in cinema, the dramatic information or other informations, how sound underlines the emotions and effects of cinema and gives a twist to the dramatic movement, to the narrative movement, and also how the technology of sound functions. Now, there is a difference between theorizing image in cinema and theorizing sound in cinema. One should always remember that theorizing sound in cinema is intrinsically linked to the technology which is used, because the use of technology has a more important effect on the cinematic sound than in case of cinematic image. For example, or to elaborate, the image, we have a standard of idealized image in sound in cinema, and when we theorize the image, we bring in many other aspects of still photography, many other aspects of painting, graphic arts, so on and so forth. But in case of sound, one sees that as the ages progressed in the history of cinema, certain aspects of sound radically changed with the advent of newer technology. For example, previously there were mono-track sound recording. Then there came stereo track sound recording. That is, in stereo track, we have two different sources of sound in the theater or during the projection, and there is these two sources on the left or the right of the screen. If they are placed, they can actually emit different kind of sounds, and there can be a balancing, centering of sounds, a distribution of sound in a different kind of way. So we understand that when the technology change, it makes a far more radical change in cinematic sound than in cinematic image. That is, though there are technological evolution in terms of camera, in terms of visual effects, so on and so forth, they try to achieve certain standardized images. So even after the advent of digital camera, for example, in case of image, we will see that there are the digital camera, the digital filmmaking, many a times try to achieve the look of the celluloid. That might not be the case in case of sound. That is, when when the mono sound gives way to the stereo sound, when the stereo sound also further evolves into the Dolby digital sound, the impact of the sound, the experimentation with sound radically differs. Now, we should understand that when the theorists, they try to understand how sound signifies or how sound is recorded and played back in cinema, how the technology evolves, and with the technology the cinematic form also evolves. We should keep in mind that in case of cinema, there is a hierarchy between image of sound. This is the commonplace hierarchy. That is, there are the people, ordinary people, or even many a times specialists, they often will write as if, they often will discuss about cinema as if that the image is more important than sound. In other words, image has certain kind of autonomy, and the role of the sound is just to follow the image, to complement the image, underline certain aspects of the image, therefore the status of the sound is almost dependent on image. Now, one of the main task of a theorist of sound in cinema would be to undermine this hierarchy. and to discuss how sound might be more complicated in case of cinema, and sound often has an autonomy of itself, an autonomous role of itself to play, and often it is the image which actually follows the sound, follows the cue of the sound. I will give you one example. For example, we are seeing a character alone in a room, and then there is a dramatic movement when another character most probably is entering the room. Or there might be two characters in a room talking about a third character, and the third character enters the room. Often we see that this off-screen space from where the third person will, or the second person, if there is one person on the room, will enter the room, is often cued by sound, with the voice, with footsteps, the opening of the door, so on and so forth. In that case, one can't say that the sound is being complementary to the image. The sound is creating a possibility. The sound is actually hinting towards something else with which the image has to follow. One good example of how the sound actually defines what the image will be is the example of horror films. Many a times in horror films where there are ghosts or monsters or other uncanny supernatural elements which create the tension, suspense in the entire film, often we will see that this other entities, these horrific entities, these entities which are not there on the screen, are often cued through sound. That is, the sound gives us an idea that something is coming, and then slowly and slowly the image has to unravel what the sound is already hinting at. Now, such example is not always to be found only in horror films. These examples can be found in other places too, in other places where the horror is not the main example. To give a very good example, a very well-known example, one can recall the famous scene of the train arriving in Pather Pachali. Now, if you recall that scene, then you will see that the entire scene begins with Durga and Oppu, and it starts with Durga, that Durga is looking at some telegraph pylons in the rural field. Now, she is a character from rural Bengal, and she has lived in a space where she has not encountered technology as such. And the pylons, creates a droning sound. The droning sound envelops the entire space, and Durga is slowly attracted towards the droning sound. Then we see Durga places her ears into one of the pillars, one of the pylons, and we hear that the droning sound increases. In this way, within a few shots, slowly the train will arrive. And in Pather Pachali, we know that at first, when we hear the train, we don't see the train first, we hear the train first. The train creates a different aura in this entirely rural atmosphere. So that in a previous scene, we have heard the train chugging off at the distance, whistling at the distance, and even in this scene, the droning of the telegraph wires, the pylons, etc., it creates a kind of atmosphere where something will arrive, something uncanny, something unfamiliar will arrive. So this entire atmosphere, just like in horror films, this entire atmosphere is created through sound. So throughout the scene, we will see that sound creates a certain kind of expectation which the train has to follow, has to fulfill. Even in the next scene also is very dramatically important in Pather Pachali, because in the next scene, the children, they discover that their old aunt is dead, and she is dead in a bamboo grove. There is a tracking camera, and we see that at a distance the children are playing and they are arriving towards the camera, but the camera leaves them and camera slowly tracks in the bamboo grove, and it finally, when it stops, we see that the old aunt is dying. So when the camera is moving, what we hear the children are giggling, they're playing among themselves. There's a tinkle of the bell in the neck of the cow which is following them. So this entire thing is very cheerful, very happy. But Satyajit Ray, when he designs the sound, we see that slowly the gushing of the wind, the creaking of the bamboo plants, and it creates a certain eerie atmosphere. And just like in the previous scene, we know that though the children they are laughing, they are giggling, and so on and so forth, something ominous will happen. And even when the camera is tracking away, and this is how sound can play a very interesting role in cinema, when the camera is tracking away and has still not arrived at the dying old aunt, it will appear that the giggling sound of the children of Oppu and Durga, suddenly they are very close. That Oppu is almost close to, is giggling to besides us rather than at a distance. So in this way, Satyajit Ray creates a tension of nearness and distance, nearness and far away, and creates an uncanny atmosphere in the entire thing. So this is how the sound, the design of the sound, it can actually create an a certain kind of tension, a certain kind of added things which is not there in the image, which the image by itself can't actually convey. So one can say that a certain designing of the sound can change the image in lots and lots of ways. Now when theorists talk about sound in cinema, one thing they mention, and this is what we should keep in mind, that the experience of sound in cinema and the experience of image in cinema is radically different. Because when you watch a film either at the theater or in the computer screens or in the TV screens, it's always a flat image. Even if it's in full color, even if it's fully realistic, but it's a flat image lacking depth. So it's not exactly the reality as we see. Reality is not actually encompassed within a frame. Reality is not flat with one dimension and the second dimension. And we should always remember that even in case of the 3D films, the depth is not the exact depth as it is experienced in the reality. It's an artificial kind of depth. So one can say that the image actually defamiliarizes the world in more than one way. It's different. It's not exactly equal to reality. But in case of sound, in case of image, as we said, that the frame, they limit the entire visual. So the visual has a limit. The frame is a limit. But can we say that in case of sound, there is a limit? No, because sound doesn't travel that way. And in case of sound, the way we experience a voice in real life, that is the wind or the distance between the speaker and the listener. There is wind between, and the air between, and the sound wave travels through that medium. In case of theater, or in case of when you watch films in TV or computer, sound actually comes in a similar way from the source, either the speakers or something else, or the Dolby speakers, speakers of the TV, of the computer, or the Dolby speakers in the theater. The sound travels exactly the way it travels in real life. So in terms of reception, we receive image in one kind of way, and we receive sound in another kind of way. And we can say that in sound there are actually three spaces. One, the space of diegesis. What is the space of diegesis? That is the space of the story world. Somewhere the story is happening in case of a fiction film, and there certain sounds are happening. People are speaking. There are other objects which are emitting sound. If someone is walking away, then there are the footsteps, so on and so forth. So this is one space, and the screen might be a different space. That is, someone is walking away and we hear music. Now the music is not played in the diegetic world. You don't we don't, many a times, almost all of the times, we don't see the source of the music. The music can't be the part of that world. So the music is part of the screen. And there is another space, that is the space of the theater. So when you are watching a film in the theater, the reproduction of sound, the acoustics of the entire hall, and so on and so forth, gives the impact of a sound in a certain kind of way. When you watch that film on your computer, it gives another impact. When you watch that film in your tablet or mobile phone with your headphones, that's a different kind of impact. Or when you watch that film in a television with a 5.1 speaker system, that's another impact altogether. So the technology and the space becomes very important here, creates a different kind of atmosphere of sound which is different in different places. So in terms of image, one can say that a film text is a singular text, but in case of sound, it becomes different events altogether when it is projected in different places, in different medium, in different platforms. So these are certain things to remember, and thus we understand that how sound plays quite a different role in different aspects, and the sound has a certain kind of autonomy, and one can't say that the sound is just merely a complementary or supplementary to image in cinema. Now, if we look at great directors, then we will see, and it won't be a kind of overstatement to say that the great directors are always unique designers of sound on screen. Now we'll talk about just a few. For example, there is a general idea that sound, what does sound do in cinema? It not only tells stories, it tells what's happening on the screen, it conveys what's happening on the screen, underlines certain aspects and so on and so forth. But it creates a kind of atmosphere. So sound, that's the general idea, that sound creates a kind of atmosphere. But sound can do more than that. And certain directors can actually use sound to create many more complexities. Now in Hrithik Ghatak's Subarnarekha, in two different places of the film, suddenly a voice appears saying "Hey Ram" on the screen. Now, when it first appears, it does not make a problem to us, because when it first appears, we see the characters, they're reading the newspaper about the death of Gandhiji.
Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Gandhi thought at twice on the way to prayer ground this afternoon at Haram.
And we know that the "Hey Ram" is the final words uttered by Gandhiji when he was killed. Now, when it first comes, we understand it. But when it comes later, at the climax of the film, when one of the main character dies, then it's not easy for us to understand that why this sound will appear now.
Hey Ram.
But if we start thinking about it, about why this particular speech, Gandhiji's last words, appear in this particular moment, then we'll see that the entire film is now conveying lots and lots layered things about more than the image. The image is just showing the face of a dead woman, but the sound is talking about a lot more things. One can also recall Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather Part 1. Almost at the end of the film, one can say almost it's a climax, there is a marvelous intercut scene. Now, what's the scene about? The scene is about the chief protagonist, that is Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino. He is being anointed as a godfather of a newborn child in a church.
After the baptism, I've decided to be godfather to Connie's baby. And then I'll meet with Don Barzini and Tatalia, all the heads of the 5 families.
In the meantime, certain henchmen, certain hired killers, professional killers, according to the order of Michael Corleone, kills a lot of people throughout the town. And when this scene is happening, when the baptism, the scene of baptism is happening on the church, the priest asks Michael Corleone that will he denounce Satan, we will be in the path of righteousness, will he denounce evil, so on and so forth. And Michael Corleone says yes. And when he says yes, we intercut to the murders which are being committed by his henchmen, and the entire thing becomes very ironical. Now, what does the sound? How does sound play an interesting role here? Now, the entire scene has 3 timelines. One is the entire event of the baptism, which is happening somewhere. Another is the entire event of the killing, which is happening throughout the day. In the sense, we see the killers getting up, preparing their weapons, shaving themselves, dressing up, then slowly moving towards their locations and waiting for the opportune moment and committing the murder. Now, this entire thing will happen for a stretch of 3 to 4 minutes, might be something like that. And the entire baptism, it also will be done by 15 or 20 minutes or something like that. So one is cutting between the two, cutting between the event of the baptism and the event of the killings which are going on. But one single organ music, it connects the both. And it becomes very problematic to us since when the intercutting is happening, the music doesn't stop. We actually don't know if the music is diegetic or non-diegetic. That is, is the organ being played on the church, or the organ is a non-diegetic music. It's a kind of music which is coming as an accompaniment. In this sense, the time of the entire sequence, it gets very much complicated. Thus, in today's lecture, we have given you certain examples and certain ideas, certain concepts related to film sound. And we understand that what film theoreticians try to do when they are discussing sound in cinema. They are trying to convey how the certain complications of sound, how it conveys certain things in cinema, and it also tries to understand the complex interaction between technology, the history of technology, history of the film form, and the film form as such.